The following program has been provided by the Pacifica Radio Archives Preservation and Access Project. For more information, call 1-800-735-0230 or log on to pacificaradioarchives.org.
The subject of today's discussion is Campus or Battleground, a report on the events of Columbia University in late April of 1968. In the summer of 1965, in my essay on the Cashing In, the Student Rebellion, which dealt with the first major explosion on a college campus at the University of California at Berkeley, I wrote that the main ideological purpose of the Student Rebellion was, quote, to condition the country to accept force as the means of settling political controversies. If the universities, the supposed citadels of reason, knowledge, scholarship, civilization, can be made to surrender to the rule of brute force, the rest of the country is cooked. Close quote. The rebellion at Columbia University is an eloquent illustration of my contention, of the purpose motivating the so-called student activists. To discuss it today, I have invited as my guest speaker Mr. Robert Hessen, who is a young instructor in Columbia University's Graduate School of Business and a candidate for a doctorate in the Department of History. His analysis of the Student Rebellion was published originally in Barron's magazine in late May and was subsequently reprinted in over 50 newspapers throughout the country. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Robert Hessen.
A larger-than-life portrait of Karl Marx dominated the entrance of a classroom building. A red flag flew from its rooftop. Chains barred the doors of other buildings, and chanting mobs roamed across the campus. The scene might have been the University of Havana or Peking. It wasn't. It took place just a few express stops from Wall Street, at Columbia University, where from April 23rd to 30th, student leftists seized and occupied 5 university buildings. The siege tactics which disrupted Columbia and brought its normal activities to a halt represent the latest assault by a revolutionary movement which aims to seize first the universities and then the industries of America. The rebels are members of Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, a nationwide organization with chapters on over 250 campuses. Originally, when SDS began as an outgrowth of the Socialist League for Industrial Democracy, it repudiated communism as an authoritarian system and excluded communists from its membership. However, in 1964 and 65, SDS sought to broaden its power base by forming a united front with communist youth groups. Although SDS continued to describe its objectives in such murky phrases as, quote, participatory democracy, close quote, the real tenor of its philosophy can best be seen in its intellectual heroes, Karl Marx and Mao Zedong, in its action hero, Ernesto Che Guevara, and in its slogans scrawled across the embattled Columbia campus, quote, Lenin won, Castro won, and we will win too, close quote. SDS's hardcore membership at Columbia is fewer than 200 out of 17,800 students. But after it seized campus buildings, barred faculty and students from their offices and classrooms, and held a dean as hostage, its ranks were swelled by several hundred sympathizers, including many outsiders. SDS launched its assault on Columbia after failing peacefully to attain 2 of its political objectives on campus. The first, the severing of Columbia's connection with the Institute for Defense Analyses, a government-sponsored consortium which performs research and analysis related to national defense and domestic riot control. SDS complained that Columbia's affiliation was aiding America's, quote, imperialist aggression, close quote, in Vietnam, while at home, IDA's studies in riot control were designed to suppress demonstrations by anti-war groups. Second, they demanded a halt to the construction of a new gym in Morningside Park, which adjoins Harlem, on land leased to Columbia by the city of New York. SDS claimed that Columbia was guilty of, quote, institutional racism, close quote, that the university was poaching upon the territory of the adjacent Negro community, and that the separate entrance for the part of the gym set aside for use by the neighborhood children constituted, quote, Jim Crow, close quote. In fact, the Columbia Gymnasium had been warmly endorsed by over 40 Harlem community groups when it was announced 8 years ago. It would occupy only 2 of the 30 acres in Morningside Park. Its presence would create an atmosphere of safety in an area which is now the territory of muggers and addicts. Separate entrances would be necessary because Columbia students would enter from the heights on which the university is located, while Harlem residents would more conveniently reach the gym through the park, which lies some 200 feet below. The issue is not one of bigotry, but of geography. SDS spokesman claimed, truthfully, that they had sought to arouse the Columbia community into opposing the gym and IDA. They admit that their campaign was a failure, which they ascribed to student and faculty apathy, and to the administration's refusal to hear and to heed their policy recommendations. SDS rebels then resorted to their ultimate political weapon, the initiation of physical force, believing that they had a moral right to do so because they were, quote, acting in a good cause, unquote. In the past, they had released many trial balloons to test this technique. First, they had obstructed NROTC ceremonies. Then, they had staged sit-ins in the offices of university administrators, and most recently, they had prevented recruiters for business firms and from the CIA from interviewing on campus. In each case, the consequence had been a polite rap on the knuckles, a verbal reprimand totally devoid of significant penalties, such as expulsion or criminal prosecution. On April 23rd, after trying to block construction at the gym site, SDS demonstrators and their militant Negro allies, members of the Student Afro-American Society, returned to campus. At the urging of their leaders, they marched on Hamilton Hall, the main classroom building of Columbia College. They were determined to barricade themselves in until the university met their demands. An unexpected fissure occurred within the ranks of the rebels, who claimed to be united in their opposition to racism. The Negro militants ordered the whites to get out, and SDS complied. SDS then proceeded to capture a base of operation of its own. The rebels first seized the administrative offices of President Grayson Kirk in Low Library, and later 3 more classroom buildings. Most students reacted with bewilderment and outrage. They demanded to know why the campus police had not been called in, and why the rebels were allowed to receive reinforcements of manpower and food. They witnessed caravans of litter bearers marching across campus with cartons of supplies, as if their destination were a country picnic. Many students also wondered why the administration had not ordered the cutting off of electricity, water, and telephone service inside the buildings held by the rebels, since it was known that they were making Xerox copies of President Kirk's letter files and were formulating their strategy with outside allies by phone. The administration's failure to take prompt action, evidently sprang from a number of motives. First, fear of bad publicity. Second, uncertainty about the morality of using the police to uphold law and order. Third, reluctance to make a decision which might prove unpopular with some of the faculty or students or alumni. Fourth, anxiety that members of the Harlem community might march on Columbia if police were used to clear the buildings. And finally, the delusion that if they took no punitive action, the rebels would recognize them as men of goodwill. An SDS leader later admitted that if President Kirk had responded within the first hour, or even the first day, by sending in the university's own security police, the rebels would have, quote, folded like a house of cards, close quote. However, by its inaction, the administration gave the rebels time to organize their resistance. To bolster